Hey guys, in this video, we're going to be looking at deploying our registration application on Heroku and also setting up a remote MySQL database. Before I go any further, I think it's worth stating that my machine actually crashed. So the machine that was being used for all of the tutorials up until this point actually died sometime this week. And so I had to recover another machine and also all of the code that was being done in the previous tutorials. And thankfully, GitHub rescued me. So I was able to go on GitHub, clone the files back to my machine and provision a new machine with all of the code and all of the tools that were being used. And so this is the new machine that we're on. So if there was never a compelling reason for you to use source control, then let that guide the advantages to using it. Now in this video, we're going to be on Heroku. So if you don't have a Heroku account, you can always check my earlier video setting up a free Heroku account, and then that should get you up to speed with getting a Heroku account. And then you can follow the rest of the steps as we go along. For those of you who already have a Heroku account, this would be a return trip to your Heroku, and you would notice here that there are some Z signs which indicate sleeping beside my previously deployed apps, and you probably have them also. So the thing is, when an app, because we're on the free plan, an app tends to go to sleep. Heroku puts them to sleep because, well, they're free and they weren't necessarily in use. So if I attempt to navigate to my php-primer-trev app, it's going to take a while to come up, and that's because it was asleep. So what had to happen is the dyno itself had to reawaken, and when I refresh the page, you notice that it's now awake. All right, so that's going to happen if you realize that you're trying to navigate to your app and it takes a while. That's because there's limited to no traffic coming to that application. All of the dynos get kind of deprovisioned until they're requested, and then they would awaken and serve the content. All right, so I'm just letting you guys know that that is why you would see those Zs. Anyhow, our mission today is to deploy our new application. So I'll go to new, create a new app, and then we're calling this one attendance-register. Now remember, you don't have to, well, you can't have the same name as me. And here's an example. We already have attendance-register as an app on Heroku. So they're telling me I can't do this one. So I'm going to call this one PHP-attendance. I bet nobody has that name out there. There we go. So you can always copy this name and just put something else in there to make it unique to your situation. And then once you're done with that, you can go ahead and click Create App. Now, with our app created, we can go ahead and scroll down to deployment method, where we can just click connect to GitHub. I'm already logged into GitHub in my browser, so it knows it's me. If not, then you might need to put in your GitHub credentials. And then once that is done and you're connected, you can just go ahead and search for the repo. And I believe that my repo was called attendance. I'll search, and there we go. And then I'll connect. And then once I connect, I now have the option to automatically deploy or manually deploy. So I'm going to choose manual deployment. And I think I explained the reasons for that in a previous video. And so I go ahead and click deploy branch and then give it a few moments while it runs its magic. And once that is done, we will see something coming up, deploy to Heroku with a green tick. And then I can go ahead and click view, which will then load my page. But then look at this. If you do recall, our index page should have a form, and our view attendee should have a table of all the persons who would have filled out that form. Neither is loading. And the reason for that is, if we go back to our code in Visual Studio, if we look at our index page, we see that it is calling con. And if we look inside of our con file, con is actually trying to connect to our local host database on our machine. Well, this IP really means local to whatever machine it's on. So that means if I put it on your machine and you didn't have this database, then it would have been an error. So likewise, there is no database local to Heroku that houses any of the connection details being outlined here. So what we need to do is set up a database that Heroku can see across the internet and can quell these problems. So Heroku actually allows you to add a database server of sorts. You can go to configure add-ons and look for clear ClearDB MySQL. The downside to ClearDB MySQL is that even though it says free here, you have to provide your credit card information, and then actually provisioning the database isn't really free. The database hosting itself is not free. So we're not going to take that route, but instead we're going to look for an alternative. And I actually found a website recently, and it is remotemysql.com, and they actually offer free MySQL hosting. So of course, free comes with limitations, but for the purpose of getting through this video and showing you how you deploy a fully functional data-driven application to the internet, and specifically Heroku, then we will use it. If we were doing it to cPanel, it would be a much easier ordeal, but because of Heroku and the cost constraints, I just want to keep this video as cost free and effective as possible. Of course, if you're going to production, then you could proceed with ClearDB, keep everything more homogeneous and more stable by just having everything inside Heroku. So on remotemysql.com, we can go ahead and click login, which of course will ask you to create an account or log in. So you can go ahead and fill out this basic data and create an account. Another tool you're probably going to want is MySQL Workbench, which is it's a desktop application that allows you to manage remote MySQL databases. And the relevance of my using the word remote is that PHP MyAdmin manages the local databases that are local to your XAMPP installation. When you have Workbench, you can connect to that one, or you can connect to one across the room or across the internet. And considering that we're actually going to be setting up this remote MySQL which is across the internet, and we need a tool that can actually connect across the internet. And so MySQL Workbench is a wonderful tool for that. So you can go ahead and go follow this URL, which is in the resources for this video, and you can just navigate there and click download and have that installed on your machine. Now, having created our remote MySQL database account, what we want to do is go over to databases in this dashboard view, and then, well, we can just navigate through all these advertisements and go ahead and click create new database, click OK. They will then show us some information showing us about our created database, the username, the database name, the password, the server, and the port. So with that information, we can go over to our Workbench, and I'm sure you've installed it by the time you get here, and then we can click this plus button. Now I have 2 cards here because I had Workbench installed before, but if you didn't, then you probably end up with 1 card, and that's fine. But then we want to create another one, so we want to go to the plus sign, and then we can call this one remote SQL. So that's just a connection name, so that when we see it, we know what it is for. And then the host name would be what they call the server. So we'd say remotemysql.com, which we can just copy from the website and paste inside of Workbench. Of course, we don't want any spaces to come up, so we can just remove any spaces, add a space before my R. And then we go back, and the username is this block of text. So I'm going to copy that, go over, and I'm going to paste that in the username. And then our password is that block of text. So I'm just going to go ahead and repeat that procedure. But for password, we have to say store in vault, give it the password, click OK. And then the final act would be the database name, which is that name. We copy that, paste it, default schema. We can test the connection. And having done that, when we see this message saying successfully made MySQL connection, then we know that we're actually connecting to a remote MySQL. Not because it's called remote MySQL, but remote means it's not on your machine. It's not local to you. So it's on the internet, and we're connecting to it successfully. So I'll click OK, and then click OK. And then I see my remote SQL connection here. I can double click it, and then this will grant me access to their servers. Now, when you're connected, then you'll see the database to the left, and you'll see an empty query window. And then you may see this message tables could not be fetched. I'm not entirely sure why, but if you refresh, you see that it remains connected and they try to fetch and they say it can't be fetched. But that's fine. That's of little consequence to what we're about to do. Now what we want to do is migrate our database. So we had our database on our development machine, and now we need to put it over into the production machine. So what we need to do is find our database, and we know that we built it using PHP my admin. So we go ahead and go to localhost PHP my admin, and then you will see attendee DB. Now remember, I had to rebuild my database, so I won't have the data that you guys have. So when I migrate mine, it's still going to be an empty database. You guys are going to have your data, but it's the same set of steps. Next, after clicking the DB, we go to export. This will then launch a window asking us a bunch of stuff about templates. We don't have to go through all of that. We can just go ahead and click format. So under the format, you see SQL. So we can leave that, because what we want to do is export our tables and their contents to an SQL file. So I can go ahead and click go, and then that will actually give me an SQL file, which I can open up in any editor. So I went to my downloads folder by default. I'm just going to right click it and open it up in Notepad++, because I don't want to open it up in any heavy software. So once it's in Notepad++, I can just copy it. So I select all, Control-C to copy. And then I go into Workbench, and in this empty query window, I paste. And then once I've pasted, I can actually now just click the execute, which is this lightning bolt looking icon here in the toolbar. And then this will run a set of commands. So like I said, I have no data in mind. So your query file that is generated is going to look a bit differently from mine, but essentially the net effect should be the same. And then once that has run and you only see green ticks below in that, well, I have a few error files here, error lines here, but that's fine. Those are related to the fact that the tables could not be fetched. But once I refresh the schema over to this left hand side, then I see my two tables listed. So even though it says tables could not be fetched, I still get my tables. And if you had contents, then you would have gotten contents. So that's step one. Now that we have replicated our database to our remote MySQL server, what we want to do is go back to our Visual Studio Code and open up our con.php file and actually change out these values relative to this new database. So what I'm going to do is take a copy of all of this, since that has all of the connection data. I'm going to comment out the development part, and I'm going to put a notice. So in development connection, and then I'm going to put in another comment down here and say remote database connection. All right. So that means whenever I'm ready to work on my local machine, I can just uncomment this and comment this part, and vice versa. So in this situation, because we want to work remotely, we want to deploy it remotely, I'm going to change out these values. So host would be, and we can just go back to remote.mysql.com and reuse these values. So server is the same as host. So it's remote MySQL, not this IP address anymore, but remote.mysql.com. Database would be this block of text, no longer attendance DB. The user name would be that block of text, and our password. So note we have a password this time. First, we didn't have a password, and I said that would be fine for our development, but for security purposes, they always give us a password when we're going remote. Now, another cool thing about this is that now that I've set up a remote database and I have it here on my local development, in my local development file, I can actually collaborate even more easily with my colleagues, because the database is no longer isolated to my machine. So I did say the remote database would be on a machine that is not your computer, because if all of you are working on this project, then it would be hard for everybody to be able to pitch in for database changes if the database is only on your computer. However, if it is at a remote or central place that everybody has equal opportunity to connect to, then it's easier for everybody to work with the database. So by deploying your database to some remote server, whether it's across the internet or maybe it's on a network where you are at your school or your workplace, if it's on a network machine there, the fact is that everybody can use these connection details and have visibility on the same database, the same data that everybody is seeing, and work even more seamlessly. Now, just to drive home my point, I'm actually going to navigate to my local host application. So I'm just going to go over to my browser, go to localhost, and go to, it is attendance. And then when this index file loads properly, you realize that the connections are working, everything is in order. You notice I don't have any area of expertise because my database is empty. All right, but remember that we had set up this drop-down list to actually read from the database. So I need to go back into my database and refill this table with the different areas of expertise that are available for selection. And then we'll see them. But the point is, now we're connecting to our database. If I view attendees, there's nothing there. But that's because, once again, my database is empty. If you did this and you migrated all of your data and all of the objects, then you're going to be having an entirely different experience from me, and you will be seeing all of your attendees. So I'm going to quickly just put in all of the specialties. So Workbench allows me to just click on the table and, click this icon that launches a select query from the database, and then they give me an editor. So I'm going to put in web administrator and database administrator. And I'm sorry, I'm not remembering the other ones. So I'm just going to put networking engineer. And I believe the other one was other. Now that I've entered all of those values, I can just go ahead and click apply to the lower right corner, and that would actually generate and insert into statement per value, which I can click apply, and that gets executed. And all of these are now in my specialties table. So when I go back to my form and I refresh and it connects to this database, then you will see that all of what I just put in, including the new one, networking engineer, all of them are now being pulled. So it is successfully connecting from my local host to the remote server that we just set up. And so the expectation is that once I deploy this to Heroku, it will be looking at the same database that I just set up in my local development. So we're going to go ahead and redeploy. So I'm going to go to GitHub and I'm going to push the changes, and here are all the changes. GitHub is showing us all of the changes that we just made in our conf file. So I'm going to commit to master and I'm going to say added remote MySQL connection details. And then I'm going to commit that to master and then push. And once that push has been deemed successful, I can go back to my app in Heroku, go to overview, deploy, my bad, and then go ahead and deploy branch. Once that branch is deployed successfully, then I will click view, and the expectation is that our form loads and we can see that a query is being done successfully. And I'm going to put in the first attendee. So this is my actual app here on the internet. So this would have been, presented to the user for the first registrant. So I'm going to register first for my IT conference, and my date of birth is actually the 28th, but then the year is wrong. Well, we leave the year. And then I am a web administrator, more or less. My email address is indeed that. And my contact number is not fully accurate, but we'll work with that. And then I click submit. And then we are seeing that the operation has been completed. And those are my details. If I go to view attendees, then we remember that we did a select query to get back these details. So it's reading directly from my database. And if I go back to Workbench just to verify, if I look in the attendee table and I click this icon here that will launch all of the data in there, run the select query, then I see that my application is really talking to my remote database somewhere in the internet. And that is how you would go about deploying an application to a remote database and to Heroku. Now, once again, it is ideal in a real production situation that we keep everything inside of Heroku. It's easier to maintain, it's easier to manage, and it's easier to, everything just connects better. But then we see here that we're hosting in Heroku, hosting our code in Heroku, but hosting our database on remote MySQL.com. And this concept could have been applied basically with any remote hosting agency. So everything doesn't have to be one place. The database can be one place and the code another place, but we know how to connect them once we have the correct connection details. All right. So I'm challenging you, just repeat these steps, deploy your application, and if you run into any difficulty along the way, feel free to let me know and I'll be glad to help. Thanks for watching.